Intelligence officers are trained in the art of interrogation, building trust, and getting the information they need to protect the interests of their country. Today, we're turning the tables. I'll be asking the questions of my guest, former undercover CIA intelligence officer, MICHELE RIGBY ASSAD. How do you like that?
I like that.
I got to get the truth out of you today.
Yes.
I'm going to work really hard.
Yes.
You were a counterterrorism specialist in some of the most sensitive nations on earth. I'm sure there's lots you can't talk about, but you were given permission to break cover and be here and write a book called Breaking Cover. How in the world did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of shocking how much the CIA lets you talk about. And I got to tell a lot of stories that really show you the ground truth of what it's like to be an intelligence officer, to meet with terrorists, and to gather the intelligence you need to stop terrorist attacks from occurring.
So it happened. Like
Yeah.
you yourself were surprised, though.
I was. And so this book actually was a spiritual calling to share my story, to inspire other people. And so I didn't know if the CIA was going to let me drop cover, but they surprised me, and they did. And then of course, they have to review the book, and the amount of information they let me share was pretty fascinating.
I gotta say, the parts where they blacked out, like it's a sensitive document, was pretty cool. I was like, oh look, the CIA blacked that out. Can I see through it? You can't see through those black parts. I know. You know, when I was young and we heard about being overseas or missionary work, you kind of thought, like, if you're gonna follow God, you're gonna say, like, whatever you want to write for my life, you'd end up to be like maybe a missionary with a bun somewhere in a war what's hard and it's kind of boring. That's literally what I thought. But my experience has been that actually following God is a crazy, risk-taking adventure.
It is.
That's obviously what you found. Talk to us about what it's really like as compared to maybe what we think.
Yeah, so I committed my life to Christ when I was really little, and I took that commitment very seriously, and I said, wherever you want me, Lord, I will go. And so people often say, did you ever dream of working for the CIA? No, not at all. And but I had a passion for foreign affairs, and so God just kept opening the door for me to get abroad. And then eventually I got hired into the CIA along with my husband Joseph, and it was a wild and crazy adventure. And I tell people that when you walk with God, He'll take you to places you don't even know exist. Growing up in rural Central Florida, I didn't even know this was an actual job. And He'll empower you to do things that you don't know you're capable of.
And one of those, you got to tell me about some of the missions that you describe in your book, because part of your job was to take, people really who were enemies of the U.S.
Yes.
and make them a trusted source, turn them, basically, extremists.
Right, so what a challenge. So you're meeting with someone who you seem to have nothing in common with. So these are very militant ideologues who think very little of women, and the last thing they think is CIA, female, and you've got to make this connection with this person who's giving you very sensitive information. If it's leaked, if it's mishandled, could get him killed. So you have to work really hard at this interpersonal connection. You have to establish trust with him. You have to show him that you're professional. And for me as a woman, his assumption is that I can't know anything about terrorism or the Middle East. So I have to go out of my way to prove to him that I'm knowledgeable and I know the Middle East and I can speak Arabic. And so you have to do this very quickly. In order to get to a place where he says, I like you, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to share this information with you.
And part of that process actually is sometimes having to lie, right, as an officer. And you have to also discern whether he's telling you the truth. So how hard, especially as a person of faith, is it to tell those untruths?
Yeah, so your whole life, essentially, you're saying you're one thing when you're actually another. So fundamentally, your whole life is living undercover. I guess I would explain it, it's like being a missionary in difficult places. You can't always tell people what you're doing as a missionary.
Right.
Yeah, so I was okay with that, as long as I'm not doing something that's fundamentally hurting another person.
Right,
yeah,
it's for the good.
Absolutely.
And discerning whether he's telling you the truth when he finally does start to talk, how tough is that?
It is fascinating, because what people don't understand is how easy it is to collect information and how very difficult it is to figure out what's good and what's helpful and what might be fabricated information, or when somebody's a double agent feeding you mistruths. And so the idea, you've really got to know your area really well. So I had to understand the Middle East. I had to understand, like when I was in Baghdad, I had to understand Iraqi culture well. And then you read nonverbals, and you look for the things little red flags that he's not being forthcoming with you. or he's not telling the truth.
So fascinating. I may have wanted to be a CIA agent in another life. I'm just saying. We're going to continue this conversation. Michelle and her husband Joseph helped facilitate one of the largest airlifts of refugees from Iraq into Europe, using their skills to determine who was a true refugee and who was a terrorist. We're going to talk about that when we come back.